Welcome, one and all, to another exciting episode of Omnipresent Information Connection. This episode is following the vices and virtues of venting. And if you listen to that podcast, you'll know and you'll understand already that venting can be both a positive and a negative when it's in the right context. It can be a righteous sort of anger that's being expressed, but venting in a negative form, as we discussed on that last podcast, here with Kevin Peterson, by the way. How are you doing today, Kevin?
Doing great.
So as we discussed on that last podcast, venting with uncontrolled energy, uncontrolled anger is an extremely negative form of anger expression that leads to negative outcomes in life. So one of those negative outcomes in life happens to be bullying. When you are venting, oftentimes bullies tend to vent their anger out in that sort of expression, being a dominating force over another person who's perceived as weaker. So this is actually part of the definition that I'm going to read to you as to what bullying actually is. So bullyingstatistics.org defines child bullying as, quote, a form of intimidation or domination toward someone who is perceived as being weaker. It is a way of getting what one wants through some sort of coercion or force. It is also a way for someone to establish some sort of perceived superiority over another person. So think about what this means to you. If this is something that you may have experienced from another person, this may also be something that you've forced upon another person, being a form of domination or intimidation towards someone perceived as being weaker. In my personal life, I haven't had to deal with all that much of school bullying, the traditional classic type of bullying that we see in the world today in high school and elementary school. I did experience a little bit of it, but I was a kind of a social butterfly. I got along with a lot of different groups of people. I was in technically what you would say a popular group of kids. So I didn't experience all that much bullying. Now, thank God, I'm very thankful and blessed that my parents raised me to be able to shy away from or get away from the expression of bullying onto other kids, because had I been a bully, I would have probably had much less fruitful and positive relationships as I did in high school and middle school and elementary school. So Kevin, tell us about your personal experience with bullying. Tell us about what you think about the defining aspects of what bullying is.
Bullying in itself all starts with not being whole in character, not knowing who you are, being insecure, being basically, to summarize it, just to be awkward in your own skin.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up, because the definition on bullying statistics didn't even mention that. It was just talking about it's an intimidation or domination towards someone perceived as being weaker. Mm-hmm. So someone who's bullying is perceiving themselves as stronger, but in reality, they may be far weaker in character.
Yes, emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
Right.
How does bullying start in the first place? Where does it stem from? Where does it come from? How does it get developed? How does it get eliminated?
All very good questions.
The answers are to come. The first one is, where does bullying come from?
Well, Kevin, bullying, as we understand it in traditional Freudian psychology today, which is still the dominating force in psychology, or dominating philosophy, you could say, in psychology, would say that it stems from childhood. It's some sort of childhood experience, negative experience in childhood, maybe seeing someone that you look up to as a child bullying another person and getting that sort of feeling of strength from that, wanting to apply that to your own life. It's something from childhood, or it could be someone experiencing bullying in childhood.
Well, to be able to keep things simple is that you had to be able to hear it. You had to be able to see it. You had to be able to literally have some kind of acknowledgement of it in one form or the other. If you were not victimized yourself, you may have seen someone else become victimized. And our parents and our teachers don't teach how to be able to protect other students. They don't teach on how to be able to help be a voice for other people when other people cannot. So we were never taught properly on how to be able to disempower someone that wants to be powerful in the first place. Our parents, really dread the conversation of sex ed, right? But more importantly is that a lot of the important conversations about bullying and how to be able to socially interact with other children is MIA, completely missing in parents in raising children. Because you have now a forced agendaed program by the government to have both mother and father working while the child goes to school. And then when someone comes home, either they're coming home to no parents because they both have to work, or they're coming home to just one parent. And then it's he said, she said when the other parent gets home. So it's a compilation of character building, or the lack there of character building techniques within the child, and it all starts from the home. From the home, then it goes to the children, socializing with other children, and then from there, it then starts to form cliques or groups, and then from there is to be able to literally experiment to be able to see what you can and cannot get away with. Mm-hmm. And then the final verdict is either you're bullying someone, or someone's bullying you, or you're just a bystander watching someone get bullied and doing nothing.
Yeah, and actually statistics are showing that if you are one of those bystanders, that can actually negatively affect you now.
Because it's psychological.
Right.
Because if it's happening to someone else, it could happen to you.
Yep, you're still a part of that environment. You're still part of the situation, no matter how removed you want to make yourself.
So what you do subconsciously, subliminally, is you start putting picture images in your mind that you could be next. And so you start to be able to worry, you start to be able to be in a little bit of fear, you start to be able to be a little bit more reserved instead of more outgoing.
Yep.
And then most importantly is that you become really quiet. You stop being as talkative as you once were, because you're trying to be able to see what could be used against you as a weapon to be able to become bullied again, right?
Yes, I think that's one of the most seductive fears in the world today, is the fear of what other people are going to think of you if you are authentic.
Well, it's not only just think, but how they feel about you, how they respond around you, everything. Your whole entire environment as a child is not whole and complete. But yet teachers look at children and like, you should have known better. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And instead of addressing the parents, they address the child to be able to correct the child. And then when it comes to parent-teacher conferences, they don't talk about it. They don't address it because, I'm not going to talk to another parent and talk about a sensitive issue.
Yeah, of course, not in every case, but in this case, this is the negative.
It's all about avoidance. It's not my responsibility.
Yep, this is one of the major causes of this. It's not addressing the proper source.
Correct. So the bottom line is that it is your responsibility the very moment it starts to happen. And then I've had parents say, well, my child got beaten up while trying to be able to protect another child. At least they did something.
Yeah, no, I think that could definitely have a much more positive effect, no matter, and I'm not saying,
right.
It's good to get your kids in physical danger, but psychologically, having that ability to stand up for someone else who is perceived as weaker than yourself or weaker than another person that's bullying them could end up with that child having a much more positive psychological reaction to that action that they performed, rather than if they had just avoided the situation.
Right. But the biggest problem with bullying as a whole is the absence of parents, the absence of a mentor, a leader, or a coach, or a guide, and then not knowing who to turn to as far as a adult figure that would take that matter seriously to be able to prevent it from happening in the future.
Yeah, so important.
So you've got all these roadblocks. So in public schools, I was in public school. You were in public school.
Oh, yeah.
When we would narc or rat on a student,
Yeah.
a lot of times it was not handled properly.
No.
A lot of times it was not handled in a professional manner because the adult, the teacher, didn't have anti-bullying training to go through to be able to then to know how to teach, train, motivate, direct, and guide not only the child, but them on how to be able to put the best foot forward and be able to solve the problem.
Yep, and you know what that does? That causes a reaction in that child who tried to speak up, and now they're living in fear of ever speaking up again. And children, you know, you've got to be able to understand that children aren't often in a position socially or I guess you could say extrovertedly to be able to think about how they can switch and alter and change, you know, what angles that they come at reporting situations. You know, kids, if they get a negative outcome the first time around that they do something, anything that's related to that same action is going to be a source of fear in their lives because that's all they know. That's the only reaction that they got the one time that they tried it. So now it's much harder for kids to speak up. At least that's how I would have expected my own reaction to be.
So the solution, and there's many, but if you were to break things down in the most simplest of forms, is help the child to understand what bullying is first and foremost.
Yep. Directly from the parents.
2, have the parent demonstrate in a mild manner what bullying could look like and let the child know that this is just a example setting scenario so that the child doesn't get more traumatized.
Yep. Won't be a shell shock when they see it the first time.
And then from there, have them go through different scenarios of bullying, because it could be just pulling of the hair. It could be a slap on the back of the head. It could be all these different scenarios that happen that are labeled under the form of bullying, right?
Yep.
So if the parent had the time to be able to spend the time with the child, to be able to get the child up to speed on what bullying is, then the second thing is to keep the lines of communication open between the parent and the child by asking the right questions on a weekly basis. Has this happened to you? Has that happened to you? So that the parent can get an idea or a kind of a screenshot as far as how their actual days are going every day, right?
Yep. And open-ended questions are very important in here because when you're asking a kid, hey, did you have, you know, this classmate, was she being hard on you today? Was she being rough with you today? She may not want to answer that because socially some sort of play out in the interaction between her and that other, him or her, and that other child could be something they don't want to speak up about. But if you ask them, hey, was there any point throughout your day at school that you felt uncomfortable or something along those lines? A child would be much more inclined to give you a straight answer about that. Maybe not tell you all the details, but get you started with an understanding. Whereas if you ask a specific question, they may not give you any sort of feedback.
Right, because the right questions get the right answers answered. Right?
Yep. And it's almost like an investigation. You don't expect the kid to tell you every single detail right away.
Right.
But you can get hints, you can get different evidence for what's going on.
Correct. But you're getting it from the child versus from another adult or whatever.
Yep.
You're teaching your child different ways to be able to express themselves so that when they talk to you later on, that you are used to these questions and answer kind of surveys to be able to see how things are, so that when they get older, they can be able to come home and literally have a mental checklist that school was actually good. No one followed me around. No one, bullied me, whatever, right? The child will get so excited to be able to come home and tell the parents all about their day because they have the freedom, the lack of punishment, and the direction to want to be able to do it, right?
Yeah. And hey, Kevin, I've never been a parent.
Yes.
in this life. So,
and that's apparent.
so love your wordplay. But I've never been a parent, but I have worked with kids in a daycare and at home settings. So my understanding of what you're talking about here is that can probably do wonders as far as having communication build up and a healthy communication between a parent and a child, having those daily reflection sessions with a parent.
Because if it's done right, it's personal self-empowerment of character.
Yep. And you start to become your child's own best friend.
Yes. By asking the right questions and then producing the right result.
Mm-hmm.
See, children only look for two things: the right mentor and the right result.
Yep.
Because they fill the gap in between the three-step process.
Interesting.
Right? So you got the right result, right mentor, coach, teacher, parent, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then the right questions are being asked, leading the child to self-empowerment to be able to conquer it all by themselves, all by asking the right questions so that the child gets the results they deserve.
Yeah, no, I that makes a lot of sense because, what does a child see? Child sees people.
Right.
Sees people that they look up to or they don't look up to. And it's almost immediate reaction.
It's a form of verbal judo.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that again. It's a form of verbal judo. Look it up. This level of verbal empowerment saves lives all day, every day. And it's all about, you don't have to be the toughest person in the room. You don't have to be the weakest person in the room. You just have to be the most confident person in the room. And you can make almost anyone question themselves, question their character, and question their outcomes or their motives behind it.
Yeah, this verbal judo is definitely something that could be effective in combating bullies as well.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, is that if you know how to communicate right, you can talk them right on down. And for those that's ineffective and it goes physical, you can be able to, again, in communication form, say that was a nice try. As you're getting beat up or whatever, tell them you forgive them. Do you know how hard it is to be able to get pummeled when someone's actually telling you that you forgive them?
Or to pummel someone else when someone's telling you.
Yeah, because it's difficult because they don't understand. They're expecting having a completely different reaction.
Yep. Classic reverse psychology.
Yeah, but when you tell them that you forgive them for their actions, for they know not what they do,
Mm-hmm.
What did I just do there, Noah?
That's sound biblical teaching. That's showing God within showing God within you. Jesus was suffering in his last day on earth so extremely and still forgave his enemies in the midst of that. And that's the most powerful example that you're going to find of forgiveness in a difficult situation.
So let's throw the golden rule out the window because that was so 1950s ago.
Okay. Treat others as you want to be treated.
Let's create a new golden rule.
Okay.
Love yourself, care for yourself, and develop yourself to be your best self so that your word alone speaks volumes every time you speak.
Yeah, and adding God into that is, let your word be God's word.
That's all part of the foundation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the difference between the golden rule, do you want to tell others that you have done? No. All that does is that one train wreck creates another train wreck. There's a reason why bullies bully. They're in pain. They're emotionally not right. There's something physically altered in them for them to feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think I'm more clearly understanding you now. When bullies are having a negative self-image, oftentimes that's a cause for bullying. they're looking at themselves and they don't like what they see. They don't want really what's best for themselves. They're not treating themselves with the kindness and respect that they want. They're not treating themselves with kindness and respect. So because they don't treat themselves with kindness and respect, they also don't treat others with kindness and respect. They literally don't want that from themselves. When they treat themselves when they say positive words to themselves, it doesn't make them feel good or comfortable.
Correct.
You know?
So bullying stems from lack of self-confidence, lack of self-worth, and a lack of ability to be able to understand what is affecting you.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is so important for being able to combat bullying and actually cut it off at its roots, is because when you are showing that forgiveness, that unconditional love towards a bully, even in the midst of them bullying you, that could be a catalyst for extreme change in that bully's life, because they can't accept that from themselves. They can't, positive affirmations, so they start being all positive towards themselves. That most likely isn't going to work in a situation of a bully who has a negative self-image.
Yeah.
That can't be the foundation of themselves, telling themselves that they're going to be positive. But if they get it from someone else, someone that they didn't think could ever be capable of doing that, because they're, trying to get a negative reaction out of them, they're expecting that negative reaction, then they receive forgiveness from that person. That could cause a real heart change.
Mm-hmm. And let me give you a childhood story that many people don't know. I was in a situation to where I was being bullied at one time, and my father had, bless his heart, spent a great deal of time with me playing chess and teaching me to be able to think 3 moves ahead, to be able to talk 3 different categories ahead, to be able to literally just be on my highest guard, right? To be able to emotionally, physically, and spiritually be able to say and do things in accordance to God's will. So because of having quality time spent with my father, I was being able to stop a bully at school on a particular day and time. And so that bully decided to be able to take his punishment out on me. And since that bully was 4 grades ahead of me,
oh boy,
yeah, it was hard for me to be able to defend myself in a manner that was physically fitting, right? Mm-hmm. So as he was hitting me, I would constantly say, "I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. I'm sorry you feel this way. I forgive you. I forgive you."
And your dad told you to say that?
Mm-hmm. Because for every punch that was given to me, I was forgiving him in the eyes of God. I was literally telling God to forgive him for what he does not know. And that gave me the power and the strength to be able to then look him in the eyes and literally tell him that you can be able to kill me, but you can't kill the truth, so quit swinging.
Wow.
True story.
What happened then?
He broke down in tears.
Oh my.
The reason why he was pummeling me is because his father ended up dying, and he didn't have a male role model to look up to. He didn't have a role model as far as a male that he could be able to mold himself with.
Yep.
And so instead of a punching bag, he was using other children as a punching bag.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why he was using other children is because the other children reminded him of his father, and he hated the fact that his father had died so much that he wanted to be able to literally pummel anyone that characterized themselves after his father.
Yeah, and you got to then, instead of just having a negative situation from being bullied, you ended up being able to cross him over that emotional threshold, and so that he could have an outpouring of emotion in a healthy way, facial baptism, crying, being able to literally release all that pent-up energy that he was holding inside of him, making his muscles tense, wanting to swing at you. So that's the powerful emotional, heart change that I was just talking about. That's powerful.
But you have to understand is that I could have taken his physical actions personally.
Oh, yeah.
I could have just focused on my own pain, my own agony, my own situation, my own duress. But instead, what I did is I looked through his pain and I held him. And I literally just hugged him. And I told him that all is forgiven and that I don't hold anything against him. And we just literally just stood there just holding each other. And he was crying. I was crying. I was crying because I was literally in pain.
Yeah.
He was crying because he was going through a personal deep issue of pain. And together, we literally fought it out. And still to this day, he's my best friend.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I'm glad you had such a great advice giver in your dad there. That's pretty amazing.
So the moral of the story is that in order to be able to combat any kind of bullying is for you to be able to go to the source of their pain and know what it is. And instead of being an enemy, to be triumphant and be a victor and helping them find the cure to that solution, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, Kevin, with the last 5 or so minutes, I want to ask you, is there a major change in how you speak to a bully if they are an adult? Because there's plenty of adult bullies out there. We all know it. We've experienced it in business places, in at-home situations, whatever it be, even at a bar, So
Yeah.
There are adult bullies all over the place running around. Is there a difference in how you talk to them versus a child bully? To be able to get them to the source. Because adults,
absolutely.
there's more walls up, I would say.
You ready?
Yes.
Sir or ma'am, I know how you feel. I felt the same way once until I realized there's my ways, or until I realized what I had done.
And you'd say that to an adult rather than a child, because that is a more mature type of conversation.
Feel, felt, and realized our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it's like to be broke. I know what it's like to be homeless. I know what it's like, whatever the topic is, right?
Yep.
So I know how you feel. I felt the same way once until I realized that I needed a coach, a mentor, a guide, someone to be able to teach, train, motivate, direct, and guide me in a new way to be able to come up with a new solution in every way today.
Yeah, and just putting this out there, listeners, if you find yourself in that situation where you can say that to someone, definitely direct them to inanewway.com, the anti-bullying podcast, because this could be very powerful in helping people have a little more self-awareness of what's going on. Because I'd say a lot of bullies out there don't actually understand how much of a bully they're being, or they're at least not, they don't have a grasp on it. They don't have the information that they need to be able to know how to combat that, even if they want it to change inside them. Because I know, in my past with anger, I've felt terrible after I've done some things and said some things in my anger. And I'm sure, adult bullies experience that too sometimes.
Yeah. And so when you go back to the feel, felt, realized, it's a game changer.
Yep.
Because we've all made mistakes. We've all felt the consequences of the mistakes. And we've all realized what we could have done differently. The only fourth step to that program in its entirety is to be able to not only ask for forgiveness, but to forgive that person for doing what they did to you. And a lot of people don't want that because they want to really, really fester in the hurt of something that wasn't intended for them.
Yep.
Causing further character depletion of who they are, and their self-worth.
Yeah, of course. And another thing to add that you could potentially add to an adult conversation is if you listen to the Forgiveness podcast, there is actually some information on there on how forgiveness physically can help us heal.
You know how you forgive? By applying a little bit of truth. A little bit of truth goes a long way in the right direction when it's implied or applied appropriately at that time, right? So in closing is that in order for you to be your best friend, you've got to be able to know who you are. Second is that once you know who you are, you have to be able to know your place, and that is to be able to protect all of humanity, whether you like it or not. Third is that when you do decide or elect to be able to put yourself in a position of being a protector, is that you got to be able to know how to arm yourself emotionally, physically, and spiritually to be able to protect yourself as well as the other person in that event. And then most importantly is that you need to be able to then correct the issue through either bring it to someone's attention that's either older than you, or if you're a full-fledged adult, make sure that HR is aware.
Yep.
And then from there to be able to literally seek out counseling to be able to get the help that you need. It doesn't mean that you need psychological damaging counseling. It just means that there's something that was lingering in your life that was a hidden pain and something triggered it. And so therefore you had to be able to find yourself a release. My biggest thing that I tell all my listeners is that if you want to be able to know what true pain is, go look up all the different Bible scriptures that deal with pain, and you'll find more pleasure in knowing what real pain is versus being able to experience it for yourself.
Indeed, it's a completely different definition in the world than in what's in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
So to finish up this podcast, I think that we've really covered some great information. This is like a one-stop podcast to be able to understand how to start combating bullying. And I think that's great that we have this out now. So I'm going to finish with this. About 20% of students ages 12 through 18 experience bullying nationwide. It's in the U.S. And that's just kids. Students aged 12 through 18 who reported being bullied said that they thought those who bullied them, 1, had the ability to influence other students' perception of them, 2, had more social influence, 3, were physically stronger or larger, and 4, had more money. Now, I want you to understand these 4 statistics here. The people who reported being bullied thought that the bullies, it may not have been true, but they thought the bullies had the ability to influence other students' perception of them. So it's a social context here. You're afraid of what they're going to be able to do that's going to impact your social life. 2, had more social influence, still in the social aspect. 3, were physically stronger or larger. Obviously, that plays a role. It's the physical fear. And then 4, had more money. None of these 4 define who you are. But for kids, it's very common for them to get a large part of their identity from their social circles. Even adults do that all the time. But what I want you to understand here is no matter what influence a bully has over your life or over your social circle, or their ability to take that social circle down, what you can do is you can show them that no matter what their influence over your social circle, no matter what their influence in money, and no matter how much they are physically stronger than you, you can still be the stronger individual by showing them the exact example of forgiveness that Kevin shared about his childhood story. If you show them that unconditional love and forgiveness, that puts you one step ahead of that bully automatically, even if they don't see it that way. So instead of being in fear over the social impact and fear over even the physical impact, have the courage to forgive, and you'll find that you come out stronger at the end.
Thank you, Noah, for sharing those wise words and wisdom with us today.
Thank you. There'll be links in the description, of course, to find out where I got those statistics from. There'll also be links to relevant podcasts that you can listen to right after you're done with this one. Videos as well. I think there's some videos from my blog, A New Way with Noah, that I can put up there. And we will meet you on the next podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
This has been another life-enhancing, authenticated podcast aired by the OIC and brought to you by the faithful OIC sponsors and contributors. Please tune in every week and subscribe to our podcast. And while you're there, explore our website with all the posts, videos, and podcasts that we have created with you in mind. While you're on the journey through our website, you will see our Patreon page where you can become a faithful contributor yourself with the freedom to be a part of our team today. Thank you.